Hi, everybody. I hope everything's fine and you can hear me. In case you can't, just let or give a short word in Slack. We are here today to talk about Neos CMS. Dominic will present it. Dominic from T3, web agency here in Lausanne. He's gonna introduce quickly Neos, the history, also talk about the user interface, the framework, and how we can develop with Neos. And if you have any question, I think we're gonna have 5 or 10 minutes after the talk. So thanks to be there.
Hello. Okay, so let's start again. The goals when we start Neos, it's to build a content management system for editors. So we think that most CMS out there are not focused on editors. And I have a quote from Karen Migraine that say that most CMS are just a Windows on top of a database. I think that we can build something better. So the history of the project, we started the project in 2007 under the Type 3 umbrella. So the initial goal of Neos CMS was to build the next major version of Type 3 CMS. The project was quite challenging because we want to build something on solid and modern foundation, but we have a history to respect. So backward compatibility, upgrade paths, and things like this. And if you start some project with this kind of requirement, you know where it will end up quite fast. We failed. We built something quite modern, but really different from Type 2 CMS. So the upgrade path was completely broken. And we don't found a correct way to respect the initial project goals. So we end up some years later with 2 different content management systems under the same association. And the projects start to be quite politics because it's pretty difficult for a single vendor to have 2 products that compete each other. And it ended up in 2015, so early last year, with a split. So the Type 3 CMS project decided to continue to work on the historical code base and refactor stuff on this side. And we decided to just leave the association and create our own project. So we are not attached anymore to the Type 2 association. The project is now named Neos CMS, and the overall project is the Neos project. We are in the process to create a legal entity to support that, but that's completely out of the scope of this presentation. So the goal of the CMS is to build something with really solid foundation, simplicity over too many features. We think that most CMS currently are just in a race to add more feature, more feature, more feature. And in each web agency, we spend more and more time to add feature that we don't need for a specific project. Modularity and reusability was really 2 keywords that we try to have in mind every time. And another really, really important point for us, it's the user experience. And under the username, the user, we have 2 different target group. We have the editors, those poor guys that need to put content of content management system, and that content management system doesn't take a lot of care. And the other group is the developer. We need to have a nice place to extend the CMS and a nice place to build projects on top of it. So just a few slides about the foundation of Neos, because I think it's pretty important to introduce the framework that we use to build Neos. I think back then we are crazy enough to create the CMS from scratch, so why not create a framework from scratch too? But remember that we started the project back in 2007. In 2007, Symfony was at version 1.3 or 4, something like this. And we are not comfortable to build something on top of it. So we start to do a lot of research, what we want to have in a framework. And we ended up with yet another framework. But this yet another framework has some really different point of view compared to the existing framework. The major one for me, it's that we promote convention over configuration. So a lot of things just work if you follow the convention of the framework. For me, it's a good point if you work on big team, on big project, like everybody will configure stuff with the same way. You don't have the choice to use XML, YAML, annotation, and thing, and you can even use 3 at the same time. You have just one way to do the thing right. So it has the drawback to have a learning curve, a bit more difficult than other framework, because something can just not work if you don't respect the convention. We try to, this convention try to promote best practice across team automatically. You don't have to spend a lot of time to define best practice. The framework comes with some best practice to follow. Another feature that doesn't exist at all in all the PHP framework is our security framework. The security framework is a central place to enforce the security policy on top of your code. So you can protect controller method or any method in your application and decide that, okay, this part of the application is only accessible to the user that has this role or this role. So it's a central point where a product manager can just review the security configuration of a project. And a good thing is that it completely decouples your application logic and the security that you apply on top of it. Like this, you can build a service that can be used in different projects and apply a specific security policy for each project without touching the code. And the snippet is just where you can define, okay, this method in this controller, you name some privileged target. So this is my customer action, this is my admin action, this is my edit post in the blog. As soon as you define a privileged target, the method is not accessible to anyone. It's a bit like a firewall for a network sysadmin. You block everything. And the next step is to define some role. So you also can freely decide the naming of the role. And for each role, you define, okay, this role can access this privileged target or not. The security framework comes with some really nice CLI helper. So you have some command line, say, okay, please give me all the controller action methods that are not covered by a security policy. And it's really powerful to use in something like Jenkins. On each commit, if someone creates a new controller, you can just have a warning. Are you sure that this controller needs to be not covered by a security policy? Another feature that is pretty unique, I think we are 2 projects in the PHP universe that use AOP. It's the Go AOP framework and us. And the Go AOP framework was inspired by what we do with Flow. It's aspect-oriented programming. It's the foundation that helps us build the security framework. It's a really low-level stuff. It comes from the Java world, and you can basically interfere with your code base, add code, remove code, change method logic, do whatever you want. You are completely free. But I repeat, it's really low-level. It helps for one thing, the single responsibility principle. For example, the security. If you build a project with domain-driven design in mind, maybe the security is just not part of the domain of the application. You can also think about monitoring. If you want to monitor the performance of one method execution or thing like this, you don't want to complexify your code base just to have this monitoring thing. With AOP, you can just plug some monitoring helper on top of your code. It has a really big drawback. It's a really dangerous zone. It looked pretty easy to say, okay, yes, this part of the framework sounds pretty awkward. Let's replace it. You can, but now you're responsible to make the thing working for the next version or stuff like that. So it's really, really low level. Can be dangerous, but useful in many cases. Another thing that is really different from other frameworks is that we compile your code. So Flow never executes the code that you write. It compiles the code in some kind of proxy class, and only the proxy class are executed. It's helpful because with the proxy class, we can override the new operator. So you can just create new object, my object equal new class, and we have some magic on top of that. You don't have to call an object manager or something like this to instantiate an object. It's pretty raw PHP, but with magic behind. We have a really powerful reflection API on top of the PHP reflection API that had some quite useful methods to do. We use lots the powerful this reflection API to enforce convention by detecting typecasting, naming where the class is, etc. Because we compile the code, we have two different run modes for Flow. It's the compile run mode and the execution run mode. So we have an annotation, let's say Flow compile static, that can be used in your code for a method like this. So this method is a static method that will be replaced during compilation by a static array. And it's really, really interesting when you want to get information from the reflection API, but you don't want to have the CPU and memory usage quite high in production. Because the reflection API, even if we cache everything, the cache is quite big. So if you try to query the reflection API for every production request, it's just a loss of CPU cycle and memory usage. So this is a really nice way to do some complex stuff with the reflection without impacting the performance of the application. Another important point, Neos is just a package for this framework. So it's not a CMS that's built on top. It's just a package, like any package. If you build another package, you are the same level as the CMS. So you don't have to fight with the CMS to get the framework feature. You are at the same level. The other foundation is the Neos content repository. So it's where we store every content. You can also use raw doctrine entity if you want, but by default, if you want to have all the features that Neos offer, you need to put your content on the content repository. It's simply YAML configuration. And basically, if you want a new type of content, this is this kind of configuration that you need to define in your application. Currently, you can only create new type of content by editing the YAML configuration. So you need to deploy the application if you create new content. It can be a small drawback. It's a bit slow to have a new content type, but the good thing is that you version everything. We have in mind that at some point in the future, we want to have an interface where you can do some kind of content modeling on your production system, but it's really difficult if you edit an existing content. You need to migrate from one structure to the other, etc. So we prefer to put this responsibility to the developer. If you create a new content or if you change a new content, you need to deploy the application. So it's highly inspired by the PHP CR. At the beginning of the project, some people from the Neos team work with the team from the PHP CR, especially Carsten on our side. And at some point, we decide to leave the PHP CR because we think that the GSR was too restrictive for what we want to do, especially in the area of workspace, where it's really, yes, the GSR is something from the Java world, where you can do some crazy stuff because you are in an enterprise application. It's not executed on every request. It's a process that's running in memory. And some stuff are quite difficult to mimic in PHP. So we decided to move away, but basically the concept is the same. It's a tree of content that are stored as JSON documents. So the next step is walk through the editing content UI. Well, again, here we focus on the editor experience, and we want to lower the need to train the editors. It's always a pain for a company that you have a training session in January, and part of the team doesn't work on the CMS until the summer, and they just forget everything, how to edit some content. So we want to have a workflow that is quite natural for editors. So that's a small screenshot of the demo site. So if an editor knows how to browse a website, it basically knows how to edit the content. That's the basic idea. That's the public version of the website. At the same page, but with the backend loaded. So the editor doesn't have this shift of context that you can have on some CMS, where you, okay, I'm on my page, contact page, I need just to edit the address. I go to the backend, and I need to find again this contact page in something completely different. And when I found the page, the content is organized in a really different way compared to the website. So here you have something pretty natural, and you just need to click on the content, and you can edit it. So that's basically our inline editing feature. We try to have really common pattern, like in the middle of the page, it's the public version of the website. On this side, we have a navigate component that helps you browse the website. On basic website, it's just the sitemap of the website. But if you build something more complex, it can be something completely different. You can, for example, build a composite document. So you have a page, for example, for the one-pager for marketing website, where you have one page with 10 kilometers high. You can have one page and some kind of sub-document that represents the section of the page. So you can do something completely different than just the sitemap. It's up to you to build something useful for the editors. And on the other side, it's the inspector, and the inspector exposes some metadata. So basically content that are not possible to edit inline because they are hidden from the public website. It's metadata for search engine, it can be internal information for you, it can be anything. We are workspace first, so nobody work on the live website, never. It's just not possible to edit the live website without starting from a personal workspace. So it's really comfortable for the editor to say, okay, I can do whatever I want on the website, but I can read, proofread, and test everything before publishing this to live. You don't have the stress of the save button that just crashed the home page. Basically everything on this top right corner. You have the current workspace that is selected, and you can have a tons of workspace if you want. Live workspace is the public website, and by default, every user has a private workspace. The private workspace is only accessible for the user that edit content. And after that, you can create more workspace. So the first one is my private workspace, and the three other workspaces are team workspace. So a team workspace can be shared between more than one user. And you can prepare, for example, the Christmas relaunch or a product relaunch. And every workspace can be stacked one on top of the other. For example, we have this new product launch workspace, and the product TV ad support is on top of new product launch. So the publication workflow will be product TV ads to new product launch and new product launch to live. The colorful column just show how many content are currently not committed or pending on this workspace. It's basically red for things that has been removed, orange for things that will be changed, and green for things that can be created. And you can review the content You can review the change for every workspace. And we have this nice helper that just say, OK, in this huge paragraph, we have 1 or 2 words that have changed. And it works also for image. It works for everything. And basically here you have a huge granularity, because you can say, OK, this title doesn't make sense, just remove the title from the workspace. Or this one is OK, I want to publish it immediately. Or you review everything and you publish all the workspace in one step. Another really important feature is content dimension. When we launched Neos 1.0 in December 2013, if I remember correctly, we ship a CMS that we call modern without the support of translation. Because at this point of the project, we have the feeling that we are not ready. We don't have the correct infrastructure vision that we want to have to power this localization feature. And we continue to work on it. And we start to have a lot of discussion with people from the marketing that have this content targeting feature. I need to write a title a little bit different if my client is logged, or if my client is a young guy or old boy. And basically, it's the same thing. If you translate something, you just build a variation of your content targeted to people that don't speak your language. And if you do content targeting with the marketing in mind, you just change the wording for someone that doesn't understand the initial wording. So we end up with this generic vision of the feature that we name content dimension. So it's the capability of the CMS to build variation of content. And language is just one type of variation that you can build. So you can have this kind of menu where you can configure, OK, I want to work on the English website for this target audience with whatever constraint you have based on the project. The demo site by default comes just with the language content dimension, but you can also think about country, because it makes sense. If I don't know, if you sell product worldwide, maybe you don't use the same image in Switzerland than in Iran or in South Arabia, because it just makes sense to respect the culture of people. And it's not translation, it's just adaptation based on country culture. That's based on another discussion with Karen McGrain, where she basically said that inline editing sucks. And I think she's right. It's forcing the user to think about the content in only one context. So you have the drawback that people start to rewrite the title because the title is too long and go to 2 lines. And it's completely wrong, because this title on a mobile will be on 3 lines, or maybe 4. So we know that content lives in multiple contexts, and we want that editors are able to preview those contexts, but we want also to offer an editing experience outside of the context. Imagine this, you need to write this long article, and this is a website with a lot of ads or something like this on the right. It's pretty disturbing to write content with blinking ads on your right. So we have this edit preview on top, and you can register different edit mode. This is the default edit mode of the demo package, but you can create your own. Basically, the in place is our default inline editing, and the raw content is only focused on the content without the UI or the interface of the website. But you can build more fancy stuff. Every edit mode allows to modify content. Every preview mode just disable the editing feature and allow you to preview the content on our other contexts. For example, you have company that have some big screen on the office of the company with the last news or the last article posted on the website, but you can build a preview mode that just show how this content will look on the big screen. And preview and editing mode can be attached to a type of document. So you can say, okay, for my blog post, I want to have this preview and this editing mode. That's an example of the same page that you see before, but in the raw content mode. So here you're just focused on the content. You just write and don't think about how the content is rendered. The raw content mode can be configured to be the default editing mode. And we do that for many projects because editors start working on your CMS before the design was ready. So you can have your editor on the CMS, I think, day 2 of the project, just to avoid people start writing content on Word, Notepad, and other fancy tools outside of the CMS. And you can have feedback from the editor quite early in the process. And that's really important, I think. So our second main target, you. I speak a little bit about this at the beginning of the talk. I can't remember how many time I spent on project to hide feature. Just to hide this little button that my editor don't want, or need to click because it will break something. So all the CMS out there, Drupal types of CMS, Joomla, or whatever, are pretty difficult to slim down. You often end up with, oh, let's fork just to replace this template and do something fancy with it. And it's pretty boring. You lose your time and you don't give value to the customer. So in News, we try to have the opposite. Just try to focus on creating values. We ship a CMS with basic editing capability, and even basic, it's not fair for the project, but we ship something that you can build on top of it without trying to remove too much things from the core. The content repository allows you to have a really, really flexible content structure. So creating custom element is just a matter of minutes. A new document can be created in 5 minutes, and maybe you need some tweak for the templating because it's a bit different, but basically you can create content that match the project specification and the client requirement quite fast. We have a discussion with a customer that used Drupal back then and that has tons of custom elements, and you need more than 1 or 2 hours just to configure some stuff, bind something, and we can do the same thing in 5 or 10 minutes. And you can just configure the new content element, ship without the design, let the user create content, and ship the design later. So the structure of the content and the presentation is completely decoupled. It's really nice because when I started working with Neos, I was really, really backend developer-centric. And more I work on the project, more I move on the content strategy and content modeling and all those stuff that need to be done before starting a project. And it's pretty comfortable to work with Neos because you don't have the frustration to organize a content modeling workshop with the client. And after you build this nice report with all the type of content that you need, you fight with the CMS to just create those type of content on top of the tools. We offer a really modern rendering stack, really uncommon, but really flexible. Fusion is the new name of technology that we named TypoScript 2 before. For historical reason, Type2 CMS come with a TypoScript configuration language. We start from this configuration language to build something that is really a language and that allows you basically to get information from the content repository, transform the information, and pass to the view. The idea is to keep the view as simple as possible. Any graphic designer needs to be comfortable with the view, and the logic don't need to leak in the view because it's more complex for the front-end guys to refactor a template if you have too much logic in there. So the goal of Fusion is to not write PHP, so don't be too low level, It's an abstraction layer, and it's here just to transform data to pass to the view. That's a small snippet. If I have a prototype vendor staff, so I have an object to represent staff in a page. I connect it to a template, and I get information from the node. So basically, this is what we call a flow query. It's our query model to query the content repository. It's inspired by jQuery. So you have the node find or node filter, and you can just browse the tree of the content repository like you browse the DOM tree in JavaScript. It's really comfortable, and it's nice to see that we have some huge Neos fans that come from the front end because they feel really comfortable. It doesn't force you to write some SQL query. It's really comfortable from someone from the front end side to understand how it works. So basically, I just push some information to the view. Not the same object, but with a new staff identifier. So imagine that in the inspector of Neos, you need to write some ID for your staff, and this ID comes from an external RAP or company application where you can get more information, like, I don't know, holiday, how many holidays you can keep or whatever, and from information. So this is basically a string that is an identifier for the RAP. And here I get this staff identifier and I process the value. This key is free, you can name it like you want. And you can register some really tiny PHP object that can help you to just query the external system. So basically, you write a few lines of PHP, maybe based on an existing library because you use SAP or stuff like this. And this value will be the value of the staff identifier. Basically, we use this pattern to integrate e-commerce backend solution on top of Neos. So you have the content editing on Neos, and we just query the external system to get pricing information or stuff like this. Another important feature of Fusion, is you can override a prototype inside another prototype. We use, again, this vendor staff prototype. You have a content element that allows you to build a two-column element. And you want that in this, if the content is rendered inside a two-content element, you want just to change the template. Because, I don't know, in this case, responsive web design was not enough to build something custom. You just have this few lines of code to write to do that. And the example below is the same thing. If I'm in the staff directory document, I want another template, and I want some additional property to my view. So it's really flexible. It's pretty uncommon because people are really used to write some PHP script to do that. The good thing for you and for us is that this abstraction layer, this Fusion script, is a contract. We keep it stable. And we can change, improve, and refactor everything below this Fusion script without breaking your integration. And that's, for us, really important to have, even for major release, a really nice upgrade path for you. If we allow you to hook on the system really low level, you can do that if you need. But basically, most of the time, you spend your time in Fusion script. On the next measure, we can at least, I think we change 3 times the parser of the Fusion script, and we refactor 10 times what is below this without breaking any website. So it's really a nice way to promise that we will not break your work. Another, and the last example, this list table, it's a community package. If you go to the WordPress, Drupal, or Type2 CMS extension repository, you see that maybe 80% of the extension are just list product, list car, list people, list stuff. It's useless to build so many extensions just to list something. With Fusion, you can extract the listable logic and just reuse this with any kind of document. In this case, okay, I want a list of stuff. So I use my listable object, I pass it a collection. So I ask the repository to give me all the stuff I have in there. And I say, to render every element, I just want the specific prototype. And this specific prototype reuse my vendor stuff. I don't have anything to rewrite to pass the property to the view. I just want a specific template for this one. Another really nice point, basically when you render a page, you render a tree of Fusion script prototype. And for each segment of the tree, for example, this listing item that can be used for listing stuff, but also for search result, you can have this annotation. It's not really an annotation, it's a metadata information, where you configure the cache for this specific segment of the page. Now, if I render this, I want that it be cached at its maximum lifetime. I define the entry identifier. If I want one entry identifier per language, I can add more property in there. And the magic happens in the entry tags. This entry tag is used by the content cache to say, okay, if something changes in this node with this identifier, please clear this cache. So if the editor starts editing the document, automatically all cache segments that are attached, that are tagged with this identifier will be cleared. For example, compared to types of CMS, we don't have a clear cache button. If you configure the rendering correctly, the cache is cleared correctly every time a user starts editing something. So that's really, really cool for the editor to not have to force reload until something appears on the page. But it's much, much more, and I think it's pretty hard in 30 minutes, and I think I take 40 minutes to get this done. If you have questions, I can answer a specific question. Just 2 more slides from the lab, because we are an open source project and research more contributor. We have currently 2 projects in progress that are really important for us. The first one is a full rewrite of the UI on top of React. The prototype is currently nicely working. We hope to ship this at the end of the year at the first alpha. And you can use the current Ember version and the React in parallel. So you can test the new interface on top of real project, because we need feedback about real project to improve it. So we hope that the next major, so end of next year, we will move completely to React. And why we start this rewrite is we started the UI back in 2009 or something like this with Ember 1.0, with not too much experience in building such complex system. So we end up with what we can end up with JavaScript, something pretty fragile that can be broken badly by just touching a small place. So we want something more testable, more stable, and more modular to allow you to also change parts of the UI. And we are currently releasing part of the component on NPM, so you can use some component that we built for the interface on other React projects if you want. And the other projects, I'm one of the initiator of the project. We want to move the content repository to CQRS. So it's a pattern to switch the read and write side of the content repository. The goal is to be able to optimize the query side and the write side with different techniques. Because if you think about one content can live in different workspace, can live in different dimension, can be translated, the queries start to be really, really, really complex. Especially when you have a content repository on top of MySQL. Basically, you build document storage on top of something that is not really a document storage. So we want to have this possibility to have one really good write side and one really good read side. And if you want to help, or if you have experience with CQRS, just ping me. We are really open to gain more helper. Basically, the main touch point is News.io. We have a really nice Slack channel. The documentation of the project can be found on the website. And we have, since the beginning of the year, a package repository of what the community built on top of News. You can have a look if you want to have more information. And that's us. If you want to drink a coffee and are around the train station in Lausanne, just ping us. We have a good coffee machine and a nice place to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Is there any question at Zurich or Fribourg or Bern or even here in Lausanne?
What is your business model, or how do you make money?
I work for clients like you. Basically, I work for client as a side effect of my passion for open source. I think I just build enough websites to have enough time to work on open source project. Currently, there is no business model behind News. Agency can support News by buying some kind of badge. So we have money at least to pay for code sprint. We organize something like 4 or 5 code sprint per year. Code sprint are open to anyone, even people that don't commit anything on top of News. And we want to have the fee of the code sprint, like hosting, eating, and traveling, paid by the legal entity of News. But all the rest is just passion and engagement by some cool agency. We start to have some really big clients that use News, especially in Germany. Beginning of this year, there are 1&1 that start to use News to create content for the constellation of website. And they start to invest quite some money. So more and more, we can build features that are paid by clients. So it's really nice to ship a product, and the feedback from the client is, ah, yes, I missed this. Okay, but can you pay for this open source feature? And that starts to work nicely. But yes, no central business model. The legal entity will just take care of the copyright, safety of the infrastructure, but we will not sell it directly. And we will not have a model like Symfony or stuff like this. So we stay a project backed with a lot of agency, backed with the community, really.
Any other question? Okay, so thank you very much to be there for this talk. And well, we wish you a nice day and a good week. And don't forget to ask any question you may have later on to Dominique. I think he will be really glad to answer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Fine. Thanks.